Anaphylactic shock. Samantha had always been a healthy person. She ate well, exercised regularly, and had never experienced any serious health problems. But one day, everything changed. Samantha noticed that whenever she touched plastic, her skin became red and inflamed. At first, she thought it was just a mild reaction and ignored it. But as time went on, her symptoms became more severe. She would break out in hives and experience intense itching whenever she touched plastic. Even the slightest contact would cause her skin to flare up, and the sensation was unbearable. Samantha went to see her doctor, but they were unable to determine the cause of her symptoms. They prescribed her some creams and allergy medication, but nothing seemed to help. Over time, Samantha became increasingly isolated. She couldn't go out in public without the fear of coming into contact with plastic. She had to avoid certain foods and drinks because they came in plastic packaging. Samantha's allergy began to take over her life, and she felt as if she were trapped in a nightmare. Little did she know, her nightmare was only just beginning. As Samantha's allergy continued to worsen, she began to experience strange sensations whenever she touched plastic. She felt as if something were crawling under her skin, as if tiny insects were burrowing their way into her flesh. At first, Samantha dismissed these feelings as part of her allergy. But as they continued, she began to suspect that something else was going on. One night, Samantha woke up in the middle of the night to find her bedroom filled with a strange, glowing light. She rubbed her eyes, thinking she was still dreaming, but the light remained. As she sat up in bed, she felt something brush against her leg. She looked down to see a small, plastic toy lying on her bedspread. Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea how the toy had gotten there, as she had made sure to keep all plastic objects out of her room. But it wasn't just the toy that frightened Samantha. As she looked around the room, she saw that everything made of plastic was moving, as if it were alive. The lamp on her bedside table swayed back and forth, and the plastic handle on her dresser drawer turned slowly. Samantha felt a sense of terror wash over her. She wanted to get out of the room, but she couldn't move. It was as if her body was frozen in place. As the plastic objects in her room continued to move, Samantha heard a faint whispering sound. It was almost as if the plastic itself was speaking to her. She couldn't make out what the objects were saying, but she knew they were calling to her, beckoning her to join them. Samantha felt a sudden surge of energy and broke free from her paralysis. She ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. But even as she fled down the hallway, she could hear the plastic objects calling to her, their voices growing louder and more insistent. Samantha knew she was in grave danger. Her allergy to plastic had opened the door to something unspeakable, something that was now after her. Samantha tried to run out of her house, but as she reached for the doorknob, she felt a sharp pain in her hand. She looked down to see that her skin had broken out in blisters, and it was now painfully obvious that the plastic allergy had spread all over her body. As she stood there, helpless and in pain, she realized that something was different about the plastic objects around her. They weren't just moving anymore, they were coming to life. She watched in horror as a plastic figurine crawled out of her closet and made its way towards her. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before, with a twisted, grotesque face and elongated limbs that bent in unnatural ways. The plastic creature reached out and touched Samantha, causing her to scream in agony. She knew that she was no match for these living plastic monsters, and she began to fear for her life. As the night wore on, the plastic objects in Samantha's house continued to come to life, each more terrifying than the last. She watched in horror as a plastic fork grew razor-sharp teeth and began to chase her, and a plastic flower vase grew tentacles and started to strangle her. With no other options left, Samantha barricaded herself in her bedroom, hoping that she could somehow survive until morning. But the plastic creatures soon broke through the door, and Samantha realized that her fate was sealed. She felt something cold and slimy wrap itself around her neck, cutting off her air supply. She could feel the plastic monster's hot breath on her face as it leaned in close, almost as if it was trying to speak to her. And then, everything went black. The next morning, Samantha's parents found her lying motionless in her bedroom. They called an ambulance, but it was too late. Samantha had already passed away. The doctors performed an autopsy and discovered that Samantha had died from anaphylactic shock caused by accumulated microplastics in her body. Her allergy to plastic had worsened over time, and her repeated exposure to plastic objects had caused her body to accumulate tiny particles of plastic that eventually led to her death. It was also noted that Samantha had been experiencing hallucinations before her death, likely caused by the severe reaction her body was having to the microplastics. Her mind had created a terrifying world of living plastic objects, and she was unable to distinguish reality from her vivid hallucinations. Many of us use plastic every day, from the packaging that our food comes into the keyboards and screens that we use to interact with our devices. But what if some of us are unknowingly allergic to plastic, just like Samantha was? But even for those of us who don't work with plastic, we are still surrounded by it every day. The plastic particles in our environment are becoming increasingly pervasive, from microplastics in our water supply to the air we breathe. Listen to your body. Are you feeling a scratchy sensation anywhere right now? Perhaps on your skin or in your throat? Have you recently touched plastic? If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more terrifying stories. Your support helps me create more content like this.